Hey, everybody, welcome back to Monday, the best night of the week. That's because it's time for this week's episode of RfRx, your prescription for coping. I'm Kara, I'll be your host, and I have with me returning co host Rob Palmer. Rob, how are you?
I'm just fine. Luckily, we had a cyclone bomb, blizzard bomb, whatever they label this, as the biggest storm in 10 years in the Northeast. I am buried under 2 feet of snow. And what I'm concerned about right now is they've picked right now to start doing the driveways right across the street. And they're going to get to my driveway in a minute. And it will be probably too loud. And I'll have to mute myself and let Kara handle all of the interview. But maybe they'll do it quickly. It won't go too long.
All
Anyway.
right.
But I didn't lose power, so it's not bad. Tens of thousands, maybe hundreds of thousands of people lost power, at least for a short while in New Jersey, and some still don't have it 24 hours after. So I'm fortunate in that regard. How are you?
I am doing well. I am glad to be here. I am also in the path of the storm. I was in the Virginia area when it came through. It wasn't quite as bad, and I'm not under any feet of snow at the moment. But glad it wasn't any worse because my Texas Constitution doesn't do well with that amount of snow. So
Do they
glad
do
to
they
be
just
here.
close it if like there's a dusting of snow? They just close the roads and everything.
In Texas, yes. Yes, we do close the state, if
Oh
there's
yeah.
any snow. Dan, you're also a Texas resident, aren't you?
That's true. I'm in Austin, Texas, and yeah, if we get an inch of snow, everybody panics.
Yep.
It's a huge freak out, and for good reason because people already struggle driving under normal conditions around these parts, let alone when it's frozen and stuff. So yeah, I'm actually I don't say this often. I'm blessed to be in Texas recently because I'm not having to deal with any storms or anything. It's a nice 58 degrees Fahrenheit right now, which it's great because like a week or two ago it was like in the 80s. So don't ask me how that happens. That's the world we live
Oh
in.
my
So
goodness. Yeah,
yeah.
it's wild, but glad everybody's doing okay and made it here tonight. And thank you for anyone who's joining us for the first time tonight. If you don't know, Recovering from Religion's mission is to offer hope, healing, and support to those struggling with issues of doubt and non-belief. And RFRX is our weekly live stream show where we host guests who discuss topics that might be relevant to folks in the RFR community. And today we are talking with Objectively Dan about his journey from Christian student leader to secular activist. And as a reminder for anyone who is new here, RFR is a nonprofit organization, and all of our shows are designed to generate conversation and engage our powers of reason. All of our guests are presenting their own views, and people of any political or religious affiliation are welcome to participate in the show. And this is a safe space for members of the LGBTQ plus community. So we ask that everyone please keep the comments civil. If you disagree with someone in the chat, that's fine. Just do so respectfully. And please respect the speakers, the hosts, the other guests, and yourself. And if you have a question that you would like us to ask our guest tonight, go ahead and drop it in the chat, and we'll ask a couple of those at the end. And with that, Rob, would you care to do the honors of introducing Dan?
I certainly would. So yes, this week we're joined by the YouTuber known only as Objectively Dan. Once upon a time, Dan was a student leader in a college ministry. Then, on October 8th, 2015, he was walking the campus with his friend Bo when they came across a fellow named Anthony Magnabosco. People here may know him because he's done an RfRx. He was practicing street epistemology for his YouTube channel. They both agreed to being interviewed, and you can find that video on YouTube, by the way. Then, almost exactly 3 years later, in October of 2018, Dan was hosting a brand new call-in show for the Atheist Community of Austin, Truth Wanted. An amazing transformation. So we invited Dan onto the show to learn all about this dramatic transformation and to learn how his life has changed, starting with the very first question from Anthony. Hey guys, do you have 5 minutes for an interview?
Yeah.
Welcome, Dan.
Very good. Yeah. It's hard to believe it's been over 10 years now since that video when I first talked with Anthony. But yeah, that's how most people know me is from that little conversation with him, and then getting into the activism scene later was pretty fun. So yeah, I'm sometimes used as an example of I'm like the opposite of like a Christian sort of evangelist kid, right? Where it's like, oh, look, through atheist evangelism, you too can turn people into me, I guess, for better or worse. So,
So
but yeah, that's kind of how a lot of people know me.
I had watched your show originally, and I did not even know about that. And then I just accidentally one day, a couple of years ago, stumbled upon that YouTube video where and I thought, oh my God, that's Dan. He's from Truth Wanted. He was a Christian. How did this happen? I
Yeah,
was, I was shocked.
it's funny because like I think Anthony and I feel the same way about it, where it's just like, yeah, this was an event that happened in our lives, and I don't, I bring it up when it's relevant, but I don't like to, it's kind of like, I don't want to say it's like being a child actor, but I imagine Coley McCulkin must get tired of being called the kid from Home Alone, right? Like I didn't want to be, oh, you're the guy that Anthony talked to, right? It's like, well, I have other opinions and things I'm doing too, right? But yeah, that's the connection. That's where I first one of the I would say stepping stones on my deconversion path happened through that conversation with him. And then I've spent a huge majority of my activism through the Atheist Community of Austin, where I host Truth Wanted and hosted some of the other shows as well. So it's been an interesting ride, to say the least.
So
Well,
you told Anthony
glad
in
to
that
hear.
interview that you had been an atheist and then became a Christian. So I don't know that story. So like, what got you
Yeah,
into
so Christians don't really know what atheism is, right? I had doubts, and I think I kind of had an unsure relationship with the Lord. But by and large, I think I was still mostly a Christian through all that, because like I was still doing Christian stuff. And that's the thing too. I think like, we can get into this, but Christian culture really doesn't let you doubt. And if it does let you doubt, they have a lot of mechanisms to keep you in. And one of those mechanisms for me was, well, I was already in a church ministry. I was already in a college campus ministry. In fact, I was a student leader at the time I talked with Anthony. So it's kind of hard to kind of leave all that when all of your friends and your family and all of your social life and everything else gets kind of wrapped up in that identity. It's hard to see the difference between your own beliefs and all this other stuff that kind of surrounds it as well. In fact, I talk about this a lot on the show. I'm like, if you can't recognize that this thing is more than just a philosophical inquiry, it's more than just a, do you accept this premise, yes or no, it's an entire lifestyle. Then you're not going to make progress with anybody, because if you don't recognize that, how could you possibly be interested in disabusing people of bad beliefs? But anyway, that's again getting ahead of myself there. Yeah, I said I was an atheist. I don't know if I really was. I would say I definitely had doubts, but by and large, I think most people would have still called me a Christian.
Yeah. Well, we hear that a lot from, especially some of the leaders in various sort of Christian ministries
Right.
and evangelists who will talk, it's so important as a former Southern Baptist and evangelical myself, it's so important
Hmm.
to have a good testimony that and a good testimony has to have some drama and some
Yes.
plot twists in it. And it's really
Yes.
boring for your testimony to be, I grew up Christian and did exactly as my parents instructed and got into this stuff early and have been doing it ever since. And it's the only thing I've ever known. And here I am. You've got to have that part where you say, oh, and then I was going through doubts and the Lord ministered to me through my suffering. And in the depths of my sin, I came
Yeah.
around after I, got finished with all my
So Kara froze for me.
dramatic sinning that'll free me from my
Did
wicked
they
ways.
freeze
But
for
if
you,
you don't
Dan?
have that, what are you gonna say?
Yeah. A little bit of
Oh,
a
oh, am I frozen?
little bit. You're good now. You were frozen for a little
Oh,
bit, but I think I got the gist of what you were saying there before you
yeah,
froze. Yeah, definitely. There is some drama that has to be introduced in order to make it interesting, because nobody wants to be the guy that says, "Oh, why are you a Christian?" Well, because my parents were, and that's,
hmm,
even though that's like
exactly.
90% of people, right? At least.
Yeah,
So yeah,
yeah,
there's definitely a little bit of that in my quote unquote testimony, right? Because I
right.
want to spice it up. I did legitimately have doubts, but I didn't have a good definition of atheism. I certainly didn't use the same that I use today to define that. And even then, there's layers to that, because not everybody uses the same label for atheist, and there's different kind of ideas with that. But I didn't understand any of that. That was that was something that, like you said, a dramatic sort of invention on my part to say that I was an atheist, because really no real atheist would have agreed with me, I think. But yeah, there you go.
Fair.
So your friend Bo, what do you think about? Would he fall into the same category? Like, I don't think he said he was an atheist in that interview. I'm not sure.
No, I don't think he ever described himself as an atheist.
Okay.
But yeah, me and Bo, I have a little agreement with him that I don't talk about him too much anymore whenever I talk about any of this stuff, just out of the sake for his own privacy, because he happened to be in that video too. And most people who are going to that video are probably going for me, let's be real, because they saw me on some other show and they want to go back and see it, right? So, I try to respect that for him. But yeah, he was, as far as I know, he's still a Christian and still doing his thing. So
Fair.
And how about the other person that got mentioned in your crew thing? Bree, I think was her name.
Oh, yeah, same deal with her. I to be honest, I don't really keep up with a lot of those guys anymore, because it kind of became awkward, especially when, you're kind of on the internet and saying a bunch of shit about Christianity when you're talking shit, it doesn't really jive well with folks who happen to be Christian. Who would have thought? So a little bit of awkward tension there with some of the folks from my previous life. And that was I'm not gonna lie, a bit of a sacrifice I had to make, because I had to be honest and truthful with myself and what I thought was right. And for me, that meant speaking out. And so there's other people that have talked to Anthony that have also become atheists, right? And you don't hear about those because they don't go on YouTube and stuff, and they're just living their own lives. And good for them. I want them to do that. But that's another thing when we're talking about this sort of cost, this social cost of changing sort of sides here, is it will make indelible effects on your life if you decide to be open about your atheism. And that's just another big reason why people just don't go the path that the
Oh
three of
yeah.
us
I
have,
mean,
right?
yeah,
And talk about this
I'm a
stuff. So
helpline agent, and I do take calls from many people
right,
who are in that situation, and
right,
they're keeping quiet because they know it's going to blow up their lives, and they don't want that to
right.
happen. Or they have said something, and now it has blown up their life.
Yeah. If
Yeah,
it was easy to just simply walk away from, then people wouldn't have to recover from
Yeah.
religion or recover
true.
from leaving religion or having questions about religion or even changing, from one denomination or faith to another, because it wouldn't be that difficult. But
It is quite amazing though, because people in real life, when it doesn't come up often, I don't bring it up, but every once in a while something will happen, and I'll mention recovering from religion. They go, why would someone have to recover from religion? Because they're in a bubble and they're all happy Christians, and they don't ever know that there's this other side of it.
and
Yeah,
I have people ask that too sometimes, and I say, well, there's nothing that you feel like you need to recover from, then I'm glad for you. um, keep doing what you're doing, as long as you're not hurting anybody. But as there are some people who do need to recover from things that happened to them in their religion,
right.
or the way people treated them when they decided that that was not their faith anymore. And I hope that one day there are nobody who needs to recover from religion, but I don't think we're there yet.
Nope,
But
not yet. Maybe not for a
yeah,
while, unfortunately. But
yeah, but that's all right. I'm glad you made it out, and seem to have landed on your feet. Was that a pretty long journey for you, Dan?
it was a long journey for me, because later the next year, so I was a sophomore when I had, or wait, was I a freshman? I can't remember. Anyway, after my sophomore year at college, I was kind of not doing super great in school. And I'm not gonna lie, a part of it was because I was sort of having this crisis of faith. I didn't really know what the heck I was doing, and that really distracted me. I spent a lot of time researching these kinds of subjects when I should have been studying stuff for school or doing homework. And that was not the only impact, but a pretty big impact. And so eventually I went home back to Waco for a bit and finished college through a program that Texas Tech had in the Waco area. So
Wait. I'm
that
not too
was
familiar with Texas, but I know that name. This is where
yeah.
the Waco.
Sorry again. Sorry, Rob.
Yeah, I'm just saying this is the famous where there was the cult that like got burned to the ground. That's Waco.
Oh, Waco,
Oh, the
Texas. Yeah,
Branch
Waco.
Davidians,
Yeah, that's
yes.
where I'm originally from. Is Waco, Texas. And so yeah, in the '90s, David Koresh had a little group, you could call them, that had some different ideas. But funnily enough, they didn't actually live in Waco. They were like about 30 minutes outside of Waco. And everyone just kind of associates it with Waco because it was the biggest, closest town. In fact, a couple of years ago, there was this proposition to like build a memorial site for all the victims of Waco, and the Waco City Council were like, "No, we're not going to do it." And they're like, "Well, why wouldn't you do that?" It's like because it didn't happen in Waco. It's not a Waco thing. So the city of Waco is very adamant about the fact that was not a Waco phenomenon. But yeah, that is the same general locale as Mr. Koresh and his little group of folks. So
I can understand why Waco would not want to own that,
right.
especially if it, was technically not within their jurisdiction.
Yeah. I mean, as someone who lives there, like it really wasn't in Waco. It really was outside. Like it's out in like some farming communities, like 30, 45 minutes outside of it, the city. So I really don't blame them for it. But it's just one of those things where Waco is just the biggest urban center. So just people just kind of
Yeah,
call it that. And also
unfortunately,
Waco
there's
kind of sounds
been
like wacko if you look at it.
yeah,
So,
there's been a lot of
one of those things.
documentaries, and I'm pretty sure some of them, at least maybe all of them, have Waco in the name, which is definitely is going to.
Yeah, well, yeah, it's the marketing, right? That's kind of how it happened, but
Yeah. There's a lot of rural Texas. You gotta just associate it with the largest nearby
right.
city
Yeah, so you
sometimes.
get it. You get it. You
Yes.
understand.
Yes. As a fellow Texan, I get it. There's only, so many big cities, and you just gotta lump things into the closest one. And some of them are so sprawling, it feels like you haven't left a city for miles and miles and miles and miles and miles as you're driving, but you are outside of the city limits of the place you started in. It just, has continued, without, being apparent that you've gone through 3 towns, since
Yep.
you left.
Yep. Very true.
So
I was in the middle of answering a different question. I
yeah,
can't remember
sorry, we got
what
off
was
track.
the
Sorry
question
for
again.
interrupting you.
Oh, you were talking about Texas Tech and finishing school, because you had gone back home to Waco.
Right. Yeah. So I went back home and I finished school through there. And eventually Anthony Magnabosco, I kind of reached out to him and was like, "Hey, I don't think I'm a Christian anymore. I think I'm an atheist actually." And I asked if he wanted to talk to me about it because I'm sure it would be good content for him. And he said, sure. So he actually drove up from San Antonio to Waco, which is about a 3-hour drive, and did an interview with me as an atheist. And that was back when YouTube still had DMs. Do you remember that? You could used to be able to message people on YouTube. So that's how I did that. And then I just kept being in touch with him and some other folks in the community. And eventually we met up one time at the Atheist Community of Austin, down in Austin, Texas, which is about an hour and a half from Waco. And I really like this community a lot. I kind of it was nice to be able to talk to other people, especially in real life, about this kind of stuff. And for a while, I used to just go on the weekends and not tell my parents. Said I'd be hanging out with a friend's house, but I'd be driving all the way to Austin just so I could hang out. And eventually, I volunteered as a call screener for Atheist Experience and was volunteering with their community for a while. And eventually I had the idea of, hey, what if we had a different kind of show where we were a bit more open-ended in our questions, not just about religion, but other kinds of beliefs that most of us consider not true. And that's how Truth Wanted started. So that was, all like you said, in that 3-year time period of going from a guy saying he's a Christian to now starting a call-in show with the Atheist Community of Austin, pretty openly, blatantly atheist. So, that's
I went
the story.
and rewatched the show, and yeah, you had none other than the genetically modified skeptic as a co-host on that first episode. We've been trying to get Drew on the show for a while, by the way.
I know. We gotta see if we can twist his arm. He's pretty good. Awesome. Well, yeah, and I certainly enjoy Truth Wanted as well. I got to do an episode with you
That's right.
one time down
Hmm.
at the studio in Austin, which was so much fun. It felt so different being in person than online to do it. So
Yeah.
I think it's great, and that's what I like about it too. To your point, that on that show, people can call in and just talk about a lot of different kinds of things. So if you're a regular watcher of the show, you're not necessarily going to get, oh, we're talking about, the Kalam again, or kind of those
Hmm.
same topics that are very interesting, that are helpful for people to hear often. But I like that there's a little bit more variety on there. And sometimes you get really
Yeah,
surprised by the
it's
stuff that
it's the
people
kind
call
of
in and ask about.
it's the
Yeah.
kind of stuff I write about in my Skeptical Inquirer column, and I have been trying to get on the show for ages, and I never get an invite. But oh well. Yeah, it's like I don't know, but
One
Well,
day.
one day, Rob, we can talk about it. We can talk about it. We can make it happen.
that would
That
be great.
yeah. The thing with it too, I originally wanted the show to be pretty street epistemology focused. In fact, the original idea was to actually interview people on the street, kind of like Anthony did. But Vern
Ah,
Grainer, who was sort of the chief of sort of the technical crew at the time, was kind of convinced me. He was like, well, we already have all this call-in stuff built in. And this was back, before it was easy to set up, call-in studio and online and stuff. We had it all built into the building there. And they're like, why don't you just turn this into a call-in show? So we started doing it that way. And yeah, like you said, the idea was kind of to be a bit more open. Not that I was tired of the Christian stuff necessarily, but I just felt like there were so many other things happening. So like at that time, QAnon was just getting its roots
Mhm.
in people. Obviously anti-vax is now bigger than ever, but that was still out there. Flat earth stuff was still out there. There's a lot of other ideas that as skeptics we should be able to talk about and define and debate on, that the atheist experience just wasn't really designed for. So that was kind of my pitch as to why this would be a valuable show. And I guess they still think it's a good idea
yeah,
because it's still on however so many years later.
I'm glad they took
But
you
yeah,
up on
it's been really fun, and I'm glad I get to be the host of the weird show. That's
that.
that's kind of what most people think of it as, I think.
So in that vein, I want to explore a little bit with that, because just because someone had a view of the afterlife and a specific religion, it doesn't necessarily mean that you either do or don't believe in all these other things. So, like, where was
Right.
your head on those things before? Have you changed? Have you just always been a scientific skeptic, and didn't buy into most of those things? Like, yeah, tell us about that.
That's interesting you ask that because I will say that a lot of my beliefs have pretty much stayed the same, with one very big exception, I would say, and that is I am now a vegan. I've been practicing vegan since 2020, and it's not entirely due to the show, but it is a large part because I had vegan callers come in and ask me questions that I couldn't give satisfying answers to, which led me to do kind of my own research on things and make my own decisions on stuff. So that's probably the biggest change I've had since then. Other kinds of stuff, people have definitely linked and told me about different scientific ideas and articles. UFO folks can be very passionate about their particular topics. So I've had to learn a lot of niche incidences in UFO history and just alien cosmology, that kind of stuff in general, that I wasn't as privy to. But yeah, the vegan thing is probably the biggest change that I've had since starting the show.
So this is the I saw somewhere you consider yourself, see if I'm going to pronounce this word right, sentientist.
Sentientist, yeah, that's kind of the label that I like to use. And so
What does
the
that
idea.
mean?
Say again, sorry.
Oh, sorry. I may have just interrupted the answer. I was asking if you could explain what that is, and I think you were about to do that before I
Yeah, for
interrupted you.
sure. So sentientism is sort of a if we could imagine a Venn diagram, okay? So here's humanists, right? And sentientism is sort of a bigger circle than humanists in terms of moral consideration, right? So let's break that down, what that means. So humanism broadly, right? Secular humanism, where we consider the interests of human beings, right? We human beings are tantamount. So we don't consider the interests of a god, or we don't consider the interests of supernatural forces or tradition or any of these kinds of things. It's always human interests first, right? And sentientism kind of expands on that, because obviously we consider human beings sentient, right? But there are other beings on Earth that I think scientifically we can demonstrate have at least a capacity for suffering, have a capacity for pleasure, and also a capacity for interests. And so, if we have other beings besides humans that have these kinds of capacities for these things, and if we are also animals at the end of the day, how do we differentiate what makes one more valuable than another? We do this every day with like our pets, for example. We treat our pets like kings and queens, right? We feed them and we try to walk them if they're dogs, and do all these kinds of things. But there's other animals that we consider for food, right? Even though they're mammals, they probably have just as much intelligence as a cat or dog, sometimes more so when it comes to animals like pigs and things. And yet, for some reason, we kind of make these categories between them. And in my view, these seem to be arbitrary categories. They're not really scientifically based, they're more culturally based, because we like the taste of pigs. We don't typically eat dogs, but there are cultures, particularly in Southeast Asia, but mostly, in places that where we would find it disgusting is just a difference in culture. So sentientism is just trying to bridge that gap. It's just trying to find a normalization between how do we consider humans better than all these other species? Well, maybe we don't. Maybe we kind of level the playing field a little bit and try to make the consideration for any kind of animal that we might consider sentient. So that's sentientism in a nutshell.
Okay.
Okay, I've got a follow-up question that I have
Okay.
always wondered about. Because I briefly tried vegetarianism. I never went vegan and I didn't stay a vegetarian very long, but I have kind of adjusted like where I will procure meat from.
Hmm.
I want to make sure it's ethically sourced and that kind of thing. What's your opinion on, for example, fungi, like mushrooms? Where do those fall in sentientism?
Great
You know what I
question.
mean? I mean, they're
So
alive. Are
they
they
so I
sentient?
get asked this a lot because they're like, what about plants? Don't plants has have interests?
I mean, you
Well,
gotta eat something. At some point, you do have to eat food.
one thing, yes, that's true, but also I think like a lot of people are really confused about this. Like maybe they read one scientific article one time, or they watched some YouTube video that says like, oh, plants have can feel pain and stuff, and that's how they come to these kinds of conclusions. But if we're talking about just the pure biology of it, right? Plants don't, in general, as far as I'm aware, have any kind of system of nociception, meaning they don't have a system that gives them feedback for pain. They have systems for other kinds of things, for chemical releases and things like that, but they don't have nervous systems, right? They don't have nerves. They don't have that kind of cells. They just literally don't. Their cell biology doesn't support that. And if you think about it, it doesn't really make sense on an evolutionary level why a plant, which, we're thinking about flowers, we're thinking about grass, that specifically breaks itself and spreads itself as part of its seeds. It doesn't really make sense for them to feel pain for that, because they can't avoid that, right? Pain is sort of developed, evolutionarily speaking, as a way to avoid stimulus that would negatively affect the self, right? And in a plant's case, a lot of times they want to be able to spread their seeds and break themselves off and do all kinds of stuff. So they don't have central nervous systems, they don't have brains, so they don't really have interests, right? And so if they don't really have that kind of interest, their moral consideration is not going to be the same as like a dog or a cat or another kind of animal that has mostly similar biology to humans in many respects, and is going to have the same kinds of interests that animals and anything in the animal kingdom would have, right? I couldn't tell you too much about fungi. I don't know as much as I do about it with plants. But from my understanding, it's the same kind of problem, where it's like they don't really have, again, that system of nociception. They don't have a nervous system. They don't have interests in any meaningful, measurable regard. In the same way that we can measure these kinds of things with with things in the animal kingdom.
So Neil
So
deGrasse
if
Tyson
there, oh,
explored
go ahead.
Neil deGrasse Tyson explored this concept in one of his chapters in I think it was 2 books ago, Starry Messenger, and he envisioned a planet where only things that would be equivalent to plants evolved, and one of them involved intelligence and a civilization. And they come to Earth, and they were appalled that these beings eat baby carrots and baby arugula, and they play with the sex organs of plants like it's nothing. So that was an interesting perspective, even beyond what you're talking about. Yeah. So I wanted to ask you about one other word I saw in the same place I saw the sentientist is ichtheist. I don't hear that word too frequently. You consider yourself an ichtheist. So what is that?
Yeah, I can talk about that too. I don't know if Car seemed like she had a follow-up question. Do you have a follow-up question? I'm sorry.
I did. Yeah. We don't.
My apologies for that.
All good, all good. No, and we don't need to spend the whole time on fungus and plants or anything. But I was just wondering, just to clarify, you were basically saying then that you would consider fungi kind of in the same category as plants. And then my follow-up question was, what if, with all of the, scientific interest of late in fungi, for whatever reason, it seems like researchers are just really interested in fungi and mushrooms. If they were to discover that, okay, actually fungi have this rich sort of life where they are, in some ways, conscious, probably not in the same way that we are, but if they were able to demonstrate that they did have, these abilities to form affinities or to experience pain. I don't think that fungi do have that ability, but I don't know. I'm not a fungus expert. But I guess my question is, if the information about fungi changed, would that change where they land in your menu?
Absolutely. Yeah. So, and this has already happened. A lot of some vegans and not all vegans are sentientists, right? But, vegans have already had debates about, okay, what about oysters? What about bivalves, right? That used to be a thing where clams and things are okay. Now, there's some things that make that a little bit more murky. Bugs are often a topic of debate. Honey is not considered vegan by most vegans. There are some vegans that do consume honey. But there's problems with the actual agricultural process that occurs when in farming of bees that may make it not vegan, right? It wouldn't be vegan in my consideration. So at the end of the day, there is going to be a little bit of debate on a lot of this stuff, and as more science continues to inform us about our opinions, just like we do with anything else, right? So I'm not going to be the one to say yes, we're never going to eat fungi ever, because we already know and it's okay. That's not the point. The point isn't to make black and white rules for every day for all time. It's to figure out what makes sense and what's best for me now. And I can already tell you, a cow has interest. It wants to be alive. If you try to eat it, it's not going to let you. You're going to have to force it. So that's good enough for me not to eat it, right? If a fungi has that kind of ability and also has that kind of self-interest and wants to defend itself, then there's definitely a conversation for that.
Interesting. I like it.
Yeah, for sure.
All right.
Okay, so back to the other one. So we were asking about the atheist position. Okay, so that's another fun word, because
it wasn't clear because I said it. Let me spell it for people. It's I-G-T. It's I-G theist. Ichtheist. Yeah.
So because I'm just I'm a pretentious activist, and I have to have special words that are different from everybody else, right? So I use the label atheist for myself, and the reason is because I have a problem with the word atheist. So you folks know Matt Dillahunty. I think Matt was he popularized this idea a lot with the show. I don't think he's the first guy to come up with it, but he has this idea that, look, God is actually about it's not really about the positive or negative. It's sort of the absence of a God belief, right? That's kind of what atheism is. And that's one conception of atheism. There are some that say, well, atheism has to be in the negative. It has to be the denial of a God position. And then, of course, you have a lot of rabbit holes and pitfalls that come with that philosophically. And then, of course, there's like the historical definition of atheism, which is a totally different way than what a lot of modern atheist activists use. A lot of atheists don't understand or realize this, but it is also the explicit, denial position. So that there's like this whole other category. So you can break up atheism into a lot of these things. The problem is, I'm an activist, and like I want to make sure messaging is clear, right? I want to make sure that if I say I'm a thing, I want people to know what that word is. So atheist has a very clear understanding of what that is. And it's kind of like agnosticism. And it's more of this idea that, look, this whole God idea, the very concept, is not very defined. So I can't give my opinion on whether it's real or not unless that God concept is defined. You might say, well, what do you mean? Well, I have folks who call into my show all the time that say, yeah, I believe in God. He's the universe. Or I believe in God. That's nature, right? Nature is God. Well, I believe nature exists. Does that make me a theist in that case? In that conception, it kind of would if you define God as nature. But that's the problem, right? God is such a loosely defined concept. It's going to be different across cultures and time periods. So I'm trying to put the onus on the person defining God. Unless you define God for me, I can't tell you if he's real or not real. It really all just depends. So that's kind of my way of doing that. I didn't come up with the term atheist. It's actually a Jewish professor that came up with this idea. But it's kind of like agnosticism on the idea of God itself. It's basically saying, well, I don't know what God is. Let's figure out what God is, and then I can tell you what I am. But until then, I can't even give you my opinion on the subject, right? So that's what atheism is in a nutshell.
Okay, thank you.
Well, okay. See, I love how we're talking about that because I feel like on your show on Truth Wanted you get to talk about like such a broad range of topics. That being one. I'm wondering if you could tell us a little bit about what are some of your favorite kinds of topics to discuss with people, or ones that you really like hope people will call in and ask about because you want to have a conversation
Oh yeah.
again or for the first time about it.
Yeah, I mean, UFO is probably like alien stuff is probably one of the most popular ones that I talk about. At this point, it's not my favorite anymore. I really like cryptid stuff. I wish people would call in about cryptid stuff more. I certainly have had conversations about it, but it doesn't happen enough. I'll never forget one of the best debates I ever had with somebody on the show about anything was about Bigfoot, like a guy being a real serious Bigfoot, like could cite things and stuff, was like very much into it. Talked about how, well, we didn't know that pandas existed for a while. We only had, markings on trees for decades. We couldn't find any evidence that pandas were real, but here they are. So why can't we do the same thing for Bigfoot? These kinds of arguments that you just don't hear all the time. And that stuff's fascinating to me, but not just Bigfoot, of course. Nephilim. God, I love the Nephilim. Anytime someone says that the US government is hiding angels or whatever,
Oh my
that
goodness.
stuff's awesome. I'm sure you're aware of this. Part of the reason why we went to Iraq is because they wanted to hide the Nephilim, the angels, that the
Oh,
bones that
wow,
they
I
had there.
did not know that was the
That's why
reason.
Bush did it. Yeah, that's why
It
Bush
wasn't
did 9/11 is
oil.
because of the Nephilim. So
Right, not the apparent, other reasons.
no,
Got it,
no, it wasn't
got it.
oil or anything. It was the Nephilim. That was the chief primary concern. The
Wow,
other
did
ones,
they catch them, or what were they trying to do
good
with them?
question. I don't know because I don't know if I've ever heard a follow up. Like, what's the Nephilim situation today? I don't know. I
They
don't
were
know.
with the WMDs,
Right?
we're still
Yeah.
looking.
So yeah, obviously
Uh,
that's not an everyday thing, but that's one of my favorites. I love the idea, honestly.
So
oh
Pretty
back to
my
the
cool.
cryptid
goodness.
idea. Do you know Ben
Mhm.
Radford?
Ben Radford, uh-huh.
Yeah, he would be a great guest if to get people to call in on that. I mean, yeah,
Yeah.
we had him as a guest here. He literally wrote the book on the chupacabra, and yeah, that's his bailiwick is cryptids.
Oh, that's a good Texas, or neighbor to Texas cryptid,
Right.
the
Right.
chupacabra. Yeah, I think
Yep, that's
wasn't
a
there
good
even
one. We've had
an
some Super Copper
X-Files about
calls
that?
years
Yeah.
ago. It's been a long time, But
Oh, has that one fallen out of favor in the popular imagination of cryptids?
probably, I mean, when was the last time you saw chupacabra related media? I don't know. It's not
You know,
really.
it's been a while.
Yeah.
Yeah, you're right. I'm
Yeah.
dating myself here by saying I think there was an X-Files episode about that because that was
Oh,
probably
100%.
before half of our viewers were alive.
Yeah. It's one of those things too now where it's like, well, everybody has phones. We all have cameras, well, many of which can record in 4K, right in our
Yeah.
pockets. And we don't get any better footage of chupacabras or Bigfoots. So
Hmm.
I don't know. I don't know. But
Are there new cryptids that people have now that I feel like the story would have to change as our technology changes, and it would be easy to disprove the existence, or rather to at least not support the
yeah.
existence of these cryptids that you ought to be able to capture on camera. Do you notice that the narrative around the alleged characteristics of the cryptids changes as well, such that we can explain why we just don't have a photograph of them. Like, I don't know, they're invisible or.
That is a really interesting question, Carol. I think like I follow the way I keep the pulse on things usually is through Reddit. There's a
Mhm.
couple websites, I don't really go on them anymore, that have some other stuff, but like primarily the r/conspiracy subreddit, the r/UFO subreddit, all these kinds of ones. I like to kind of keep the tabs on to see what's going
Mhm.
on. And I would say in terms of cryptids, the only one that has gained traction that I've paid attention to in recent years is Wendigo stuff. You know about the Wendigo?
Oh, yes, only because I watched Supernatural. At first ironically, but then I got sucked in.
Right. So here's
And
what makes the Wendigo stuff interesting. So the Wendigo, in case you're not familiar, is a sort of Native American, I believe, Algonquin sort of folklore, and it's this idea that it's a shapeshifter sort of being, right? So
Mhm.
it can turn into an animal, but it can also turn into people, right? And so the idea is there may be Wendigos among us because they're maybe looking like your neighbor or something, but they'll transform. I saw at least one footage of somebody claiming it was like a Wendigo transformation. And I think it was like CG something or whatever.
They're
I don't
clearly
know.
wrong. They're
So tell me.
actually the reptilian alien race who's
Yeah,
portraying.
so reptilian stuff's kind of related to that idea because
Mhm.
it's one of those things where, oh, I think I saw a Wendigo because I thought I saw somebody transform or something, and maybe it's something in a different light. But these will be orally sort of transmitted through mediums like Reddit and stuff. And that is more, I think the plausible deniability comes there because, well, after they've transformed and they're people, you put them on camera, that doesn't do anything anymore, right? So
Yeah,
maybe that's why
exactly.
you still hear about that, and maybe because it's just kind of gotten trendy again to kind of talk about Wendigos. But that, in terms of cryptids, that's probably the most popular. And of course, aliens. Alien stuff is
Oh,
always
yeah.
evergreen. People always have alien stories. So
TikTok for the last 3 months has been filled with people channeling aliens from Three
yes,
Eyes.
yes,
They're channeling them, or wow, there was this one video where someone was channeling them and said that the CERN organization had opened a portal and they were in communication with them, and there were like 5,000 reptilian soldiers in hibernation on the vehicle. It's like, oh my god, my head hurts
What?
when I watch these things.
Oh, so that got mixed together then with the story about CERN opened a portal to hell.
Oh, I've
Or
never heard
oh
that
yeah,
one.
oh
yeah. That's
yeah,
definitely a
that
thing. CERN's the
yeah.
subject of a lot of these sorts of things, but yeah, TikTok's a cesspool for that kind of stuff. If you want to know about what's going on in the shadow government, just go to TikTok and somebody will be channeling Bashar or whatever,
Oh
to give you
yeah.
all the answers. Yeah.
So how about the
Good to
topic that
know.
that never dies? And that's I don't mean that as a joke. Ghosts.
Yeah.
Ha, I see what you did
Ghost
there.
stuff.
Yeah.
We've
Yeah.
definitely had some conversations about ghost stuff. And here's the thing with the UFO and the ghost stories. Like a lot of people call in and they'll be like, yeah, I saw this thing happen. And they'll tell me a story. And I just had to be like, cool story, bro. Like, I don't know what you want me to do with that. They'll be like, yeah, I had this weird paranormal experience happen to me 15 years ago. And it's like, okay, I can't really do anything with a story from like 15 years ago. I like it when people are talking about news articles
Mhm.
or just things that I can kind of comment on that are more concurrent, or at least a video or a picture or something. I have a guy who's called in several times. He believes that NASA's faked these aliens on Mars, and he sends me these pictures that he like screen capped from a YouTube video.
Wait,
And
wait,
I don't
NASA
know, there's
faked aliens on Mars? That means there
yeah,
are
well, so
some
yeah,
people-
faked footage from Mars, and that there's some that have leaked basically that actually do have aliens in it, but really they're just like rock formations. But anyway, so that kind of stuff's more fun to me. I did have a former ghost hunter on one time, and that was a really interesting interview. So I do have that stuff on occasion as well.
Was that? Did you have Kenny Biddle?
No,
No.
no, have not.
Oh, he's a lot of fun. I love his stories about being a ghost hunter and then how he became skeptical about
Oh,
that.
nice. Yeah.
He's
Yeah.
the chief investigator for the Committee for Scientific for Skeptical Inquiry now, and he writes for Skeptical Fire magazine. He was a ghost hunter for decades, and he came on the show several times and told the story of how he changed his mind, and now he's on the opposite end of that spectrum. So he would be a great guest.
Yeah.
Nice. Okay. Yeah. Well, there you go.
We'll have to share Rolodexes
That's
later.
right. That's right.
So I
Yeah.
have to tell you, Dan, often when I hear these stories, like you were just relating, where someone tells a story from 15 years ago, whatever, my mind goes to it, and I don't think there's enough pushback on this. And maybe it's because people don't think about it, and maybe it's because people don't want to hear it, and it comes across as arrogant when you say it. But memory sucks. Like whatever you're telling me you think happened 15 years ago is not what happened. We have memory experts who know that. Every time you think of a story in your brain, it changes it in your brain. And so whatever you're thinking happened 15 years ago that you're describing to me like, this is what happened. No, it didn't. But I mean, that's a hard conversation to happen with people. I've had that with someone who claimed, John Edwards was a psychic because he told her in a reading about something. And she said, I remember what happened. And, they don't want to hear that your memory is not what you think it is, even though it's not an individual thing that your memory is bad. It's human memory sucks.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah. It really is something that I think should be emphasized more for better or worse, because sometimes there are things that happen, with individuals. Like, okay, so I don't know how political I can get on this show.
You can get as political as you want.
Okay.
We are not going to comment on promoting or any political parties or candidates, but you are our guest and you are giving your personal opinions about things.
Here's my personal opinions on things. So we're talking about the Epstein files. Okay. How many conspiracy theories have been going around about the Epstein files, right? 1 million of them, right? They can't all be true, right? There has to be some truth to it, sure, but what's the scalability there, right? So one of the things that's come out is they talk about these FBI calls that we're talking about Trump, right? And these people are saying, oh, this thing happened to me a couple of years ago or whatever. And of course there's victims, and this has already been, that's already been demonstrated in the court, right? That there are victims of Jeffrey Epstein and things like that.
Well, he was already convicted.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. But the FBI gets tip lines for all kinds of stuff that is either true or not true, right? And they have to do these follow-ups and these things. So how do you evaluate that, right? How do you go through anybody who can make up a story about all kinds of things? And there's processes for that. And anybody that has, and when it comes to sexual assault or these kinds of serious crimes, they deserve to be investigated. Anybody that says they have a story should be looked into. And at the same time, you also have to be like, well, how do we do that effectively? We have all kinds of processes for that, obviously. You hear that kind of stuff too. It's really sad. People who have these stories about people that have hurt them or whatever, and sometimes it can turn out to be delusions and stuff. And that's really unfortunate when people call in and say, oh, I've had this thing happen to me. And it's like, I can't tell you what did or didn't happen to you in your life. You have to be able to talk about that with a professional, not a guy that's on a call-in show, some people who definitely have some kinds of delusions and stuff have called in, or at least in my opinion, seem to be having delusions. And I can't tell them, yeah, you're having delusions about this. I have to just kind of meet people where they're at and see. But that's difficult as just a empathetic human being, right? on
Yeah, absolutely.
what's
Yeah.
how to deal with that. I'm certainly not a professional in that regard. So
Since you mentioned the Epstein files, I'm going to reveal
mhm.
here for the first time on RfRx
Oh boy.
that we have had two guests who are in the Epstein files.
Oh, great. Love that for you.
Yeah,
So, so the
but
problem,
not in
not in the way you
a
think.
negative way
Not
though.
in the
Okay.
way you think.
Yeah.
So the
Yeah.
problem is there's probably a bazillion people listed because someone sends an email to him with a CC about somebody else. And that happened to Susan Gerbic and to Richard
Mhm.
Saunders, who are two professional skeptics, because Deepak Chopra was railing against skeptics who are skeptical of him. And he knows Epstein and sent him a copy of the whole list of everyone who spoke at that skeptical meeting called the Amazing Meeting 10. And those people were named in a list of about 30 people. So we've had two guests who are in the
Yeah.
Epstein files.
That's another thing. People, it drives me crazy about this Epstein file stuff. It's like, oh wow, hey, there's all these names that are in here. It's like, yeah, did you read the email?
Yeah.
Did you actually look at the source of this? Because it may just be just an email. Like somebody just being in an email doesn't mean that they're
Yeah.
guilty of sexual misconduct, man. That's not how that works. Like, so everybody wants to be a judge on these kinds of things. And obviously heinous stuff is happening here. But we don't figure out the truth of it by, oh, well, this guy's name appeared in an email, right? So there has to be more to it than that. So it's disappointing to see how that has turned out. But I hope everybody that's obviously been a victim of that finds justice for sure.
I mean, some
I just
people,
want to make sure that we're doing our due diligence here and figuring out, hey, where are we getting this claim from? How are we evaluating this? Are you thinking this way because you saw a Reddit post about it, or did you actually look at this yourself? What's the methodology here? What's going on? So,
And this is also why it's important that our justice system is
yeah,
independent from politics so
right.
that they can investigate anyone who is in there. And that's all I'm going to say about that.
Yeah,
Uh,
yeah, for sure.
but, um, but
I'm
kind of
going to
getting
say
back.
one more thing regarding this if we move on, right?
Yeah, yeah.
All
Yeah,
right. All right. Epstein file. So conspiracy theory. It could be said that perhaps the amount of documents that are being released with all of these random names that have nothing to do with any crimes or anything are kind of to obscure the fact of the people, the limited number who are in there who should be prosecuted.
hmm yeah. Are you asking if I agree with that? Because I mean,
Yeah.
yeah, I don't know. Who knows, right? As someone who I don't talk about my real job, but I do work in law. I do work in legal services, and so I've seen how the normal document redaction process works, and everything about this case is very unusual. And I'm not the first person. People more qualified and professional than me have pointed this out. And there's no privilege log, right? So there's no thing that says, okay, we redacted this because of this, we redacted this because of this. So it's anybody's guess, really. Who knows? We can't say what is and isn't redacted in there. So I have my own suspicions as well, Rob. I think there's definitely some interesting things happening, but it's going to be somebody who knows more than me and is paid better that's going to figure that out. I'll tell you that.
That's fair. Well, yeah. So, kind of going back to what you were talking about, though, when we were, talking about, well, maybe you're talking to someone who is having some sort of a delusion, or it seems like that might be the case, but obviously telling them that isn't necessarily going to be productive in that moment.
Yeah.
I wonder if you could expand a little bit on some of the techniques that you do use. Like you mentioned, the genesis of the idea for the show being kind of similar to street epistemology, and if you want to talk a little bit about what that entails
Yeah, for
and
sure.
what techniques you like to use that you find effective.
So, street epistemology in general, in case you're not familiar, is this method of talking to people about what they believe and why they believe it. And it's a way of trying to approach the topic without judgment, without your own biases, sort of an evaluation on what people's beliefs are. So, for example, if I wanted to talk to Carl about their belief in God, let's say, I know you don't believe in God, but if you did, I might ask, okay, how confident are you in that belief? Would you say on a scale of 1 to 10, God, 10 being absolutely 100% he's real, 1 being I'm not sure at all if he's real, what would that look like? And maybe you say, oh, I'm like 90%. Okay. So it's like, what are the things that lead you to that belief? And if we removed any of these things, would that change your belief? And we ask these kinds of questions because a lot of people say they have these reasons for believing, but it turns out if you take them out, of that, belief pile, it doesn't actually move the needle. And if it doesn't move the needle, then it must be something else that's at play there. So what I like about it is that, again, it's beliefs are more than just an acceptance or denial of a premise, right? That's the sort of academic understanding of a belief, but that's just not how people are most of the time. A belief is psychological, a belief is emotional, a belief is something that can be irrationally invested in, for better or for worse. And so when you use street epistemology, and again, this is the nutshell version, there's plenty more talks about the ins and outs of it if you want to know more. But in general, it's a way of talking to people and giving people that common tool set on how to approach stuff. And the scary thing about street epistemology is that it can work on anything. It doesn't have to work on just the Christians. I've used it on a lot of atheists, on a lot of different beliefs. And let me tell you, it exposes some things. You have to be very careful when using it, because we're also in an age where if you're just asking questions, that can also kind of be a bit of a red flag. And yeah, I don't want to be that guy. Somebody said, well, isn't street epistemology the same way that people are just asking questions about whether trans people's identities are legitimate? And I was like, yeah, maybe it could be. Maybe that's something we have to figure out and see how we can best use it as a tool just purely for investigative and evaluative purposes, and not for casting light or judgment and things like that. I don't use it to judge people for what they believe and don't believe. I use it to figure out what they believe and if the reasons are good. And figuring out if they're good or not, by the way, is not for me to decide. That's for the person holding the belief, which is another key thing. It's not evangelism. It's not me saying, here's why your belief sucks, so you should have my belief. If you watch that video with Anthony Magnabosco, he never tells me this is why your beliefs suck and why you need to be an atheist. Doesn't do that. Just leaves me in a pool of my own reflection to figure that stuff out, which is why I think street epistemology is also a very powerful tool.
Well, yeah, and I'm actually glad that you brought up that comparison about, oh, well, that's like the bros that are just asking questions. And
Yeah,
what I hate about that phrase, I'm just asking questions, is that it is not true.
yeah,
They're not just asking questions, they're asking loaded questions.
yeah, for
And
sure.
then saying, oh, I just asked a question. No, no, you made a statement that had a question mark at the end of it.
Yeah,
And you're
yeah,
pretending that that was a question. But what you're describing is what I'm hearing is that it's actually asking a curious question and being open to hearing the answer and attempting to understand what the person means, not trying to put words into their mouth or lead them to a particular answer. Is that right?
yeah, absolutely. I mean, and I say this as the most unqualified, non-certified person in the world to say this, but I have heard from people who are professionals that say it's kind of like a therapy, right? It is a way
Yeah.
of talking to yourself in a way, almost, in figuring out where you're at with something. We were talking about like memories and emotional ideas with associated with that, right? The satanic panic was quite famous for this therapeutic technique at the time, where people would come out with these repressed memories. You know about this, right? Where they're like, "Oh, we're going
Mhm.
to help bring some of this stuff out," right? And how dangerous is this, right? To make people emotionally attached to these ideas that, oh, I was abused when I was a kid because of XYZ, right? We were kind of talking about some of this earlier. And so it's like, well, I think, at best that could be neutral. At worst, that could lead somebody to do or act or behave in such a way that might be harmful towards themselves or others, or maybe make them fearful about things they don't need to be fearful about. So how do you approach an idea like that without judgment, without saying, "Hey, this is all BS," you know? You know, what's keeping that belief afloat, and can we evaluate it? So that's a good tool for that, right? That's a good use case. I would say a positive case in which you can help somebody make that change if it's in their benefit. But again, at the end of the day, street epistemology isn't about the change, it's more about the evaluative properties. Any belief, any period, should be open to evaluation. And this is a way to do that, I think, as ethically as you really can be. If there's a more ethical way, I'd love to hear it, besides just not talking about it at all. So that's what some people say. They say, why do you even talk about this stuff? Well, because I live in the world and people
Right.
believe things. So I might as well talk about it, right? I'm not saying use street epistemology on your grandma when she's on her deathbed, on why she believes in God or not. Okay, maybe that's not the best use of your time. But I am saying that for broadly speaking, most situations, it's pretty helpful, pretty useful.
So
Mhm.
often I'll get a caller on the helpline who's at an impasse with a spouse or someone else in their family, and
Hmm.
they're arguing, and the conversation does turn to street epistemology, because basically, I tell them, well, arguing with a person often makes them think about why they believe what they think, and in that way, in that kind of scenario where you're arguing with them, people actually leave the conversation more firmly believing what they went into the conversation with before they started arguing. And that's actually a psychological phenomenon called the backfire effect. So, I
Hmm.
tell them about that, and then we talk about street epistemology. But my one area of concern is, if you've already had those kinds of arguments with somebody you're close to, they're kind of primed to be in that mindset, and they're probably not going to be okay with you just asking questions. So, my understanding is this is better on, like, your scenario where you meet somebody randomly and it's a stranger, and you didn't care what they were going to say, so, or that kind of thing. You weren't trying to convince them. So what do you think
Yeah,
about that? Can you do it
I
on
would.
a family member who you've argued with before? What do you think?
You absolutely can, but it's more difficult, right? I would say you, Rob, and you, Car, probably would have a better time talking to my parents about their beliefs than I ever would. Even though now I say that with some caveats, right? I know their background, I know their history, so that might help
Mhm.
inform the way I talk to them in a way, but it's also going to bias me in a way because
Mhm.
I'm their kid, right? And so they may speak to me in a way that they wouldn't speak to a stranger. They may give information to me that they wouldn't, or vice versa. Maybe they keep things away from me. So, there's a reason why if you want professional help, you go to a therapist and you don't. I mean, your best friends is there for a support system, but having a neutral third party is important when talking about your problems. And street epistemology is the same way. If you're talking about a belief, particularly ones that you're emotionally invested in, it's best to talk to it with strangers. I have way better conversations with strangers on the internet over the phone than I do with my own family members sometimes because of how hard it can be to one stay objective, but also um, to not let those all those contributing factors get in the way of evaluating something the way that it should be. So
Right, because if you've argued with someone before about something and you know what their position is, and probably if it's something you've argued about multiple times, you both maybe dug in on a position, and to change your mind with that person is basically admitting that you're wrong. But if you have that same conversation with somebody else that you've never talked to about it before, they don't know you're changing your mind. You don't have to admit anything to them, so you can maybe save a lot of face that way too, when you haven't started the conversation from a dug in position that you then have to dig yourself out of.
right, right, for sure,
Yeah.
and it's hard to when again, I find the benefit is talking to people who mostly agree with me on a lot of different things, but maybe have one or two differences that I try to suss out. Politically, this can be useful. Ideologically, this can be useful. There's some people who are in our scene that maybe are doing things for different reasons, and I may not like the reasons that they're doing things. Right? I've certainly met a few characters that way. So it's not just for talking to folks of the quote other side, right? It's also to help those who are share your spaces as well. It should be a tool accessible for anybody.
Hmm. Yeah. I like that. And where could people go if they wanted to learn better how to use that tool or tools like that? Do you have any recommendations for people that want to get better at this?
Well, I would say so. Anthony Magnabosco is in charge of Street Epistemology International, which is a nonprofit organization that's dedicated to teaching and building materials for street epistemology. They already have a ton of stuff out there. I know he's been working on some other stuff in the future, but they have a website that talks about it. And of course, his YouTube channel is a great start for that. And there's a million other great people that do these kinds of talks. So I've also done talks in the past, at least at some point or another. So if you look at my name in street epistemology, there should be at least one presentation out there. So there's a couple of suggestions.
Awesome. Thanks. And I've just dropped that link in the chat so people can check that out and build those skills. That's what we're all about. Um, okay, well, let's see. I know we are getting close to the end of our time here, so let's kind of start thinking about wrapping up. Oh, Rob, I see you had a good question for Dan. If you want to go ahead with that. Or if you, oh, you've got the sound going on. Oh, that's why you typed that. Okay, great. Now I'm tracking. I'm so good at subtlety. So another question, Dan, is do you have any other atheist or humanist or secular content that you follow and that you would recommend for other folks who are interested in this type of thing?
Well, if we haven't already plugged it enough, obviously there's my channel, Truthwise. There's also other shows with the Atheist Community of Austin. So if you like the call-in show format, you should also check out Talk Heathen or Atheist Experience. I do make appearances on those as well. And I also do another stream on Thursday nights with my good buddy Prophet Azad called Zadanza, and that is just kind of some React content. It's kind of whatever we want it to be, honestly. It's just more of a hangout, more for fun. In terms of other people in the space, gosh, I mean, there's a million names. How long do we got? There's everybody that's ever been on my show as a guest, including folks from Recovering from Religion, are all great people to recommend. So I think I'll leave it at that. That's probably enough places to check out.
Absolutely. And I've dropped the link in the chat as well for Truth Wanted. And can you tell me again the name of the show that you
Yep.
do with Prophet of Zod?
Zodanza, Zodanza, and that is a live
Oh,
show that happens Thursdays at 9 p.m. Central every week.
well, I'm going to have to check that out. That sounds
Heck yeah.
fantastic to me. Okay, and I'm going to grab the link to that too, and we'll drop that in there as well. And normally around this time, I would also ask, where can people find you? But we kind of covered that.
Yeah, we kind
Is
of did,
there,
huh? I kind of did the
yeah,
self promo there. Didn't really mean to,
yeah,
but
well, that was the intention. We
mm.
did want to get that information. So, and I actually did. I feel silly, but I did not know about the Zadanza show. So I'm kind of excited to know about that now, and I'm definitely going to be giving that a follow. So
Oh yeah,
thanks for
check it out.
sharing
We
that.
just did this whole thing. We read through Christian comedian Brad Stein's book. And it's like this hidden treasure trove of just the worst stuff ever. And it's like awesome. I won't like, oh my goodness. We're talking about like justifying slurs for little people. We're talking
Oh my
about
goodness.
doing evangelism for strippers, like just the most amazing things you could possibly imagine in a Christian comedian's book, but it's all there. So that and more
Wow.
on Zadanza. Check it out.
Wow. All right.
Yeah.
Well, you heard
Hmm.
about it here first, folks. Get out there and check it out. Well, fantastic. We will do that, and thank you so much for sharing with us tonight and coming on the show. We're so glad to have you and to learn more about what you've been up to. I hope you'll come back soon. And with that, let's go ahead and start wrapping up so we can go to our hangout. Thank you, Dan, for being here, and thank you, Rob, and thank you, Gail, who's joined us as well. And thank you, everybody who helps us put this show on every week, and for everybody who comes and participates in the show and engages with the content. We're here because y'all keep coming back. So we'll keep doing it as long as you want to come see us on Monday nights or subsequently. And with that, Rob, what do we have coming up in the near future? Or, okay, you still got noise in the background. We'll just keep on then. Yeah, so join us next week, same time, same channel. We have Honey Getter, who's going to be joining us next week. And some of our upcoming guests include Dr. Daryl Ray. And Jessica Pizzo. And for more information about recovering from religion and to access any of our other resources, you can visit us on our website, recoveringfromreligion.org, where you can do things like get in touch with a volunteer on our helpline, attend a support group, peruse the online resources, listen to the podcast, visit the blog, or get connected with a licensed mental health care professional. And of course, thanks to the lovely Nikki from across the pond, the Atheist Community of Austin's fan-run Discord server also live streams our RfRx talks every week on the Atheist Community of Discord, which is another great place to find secular community. And as I mentioned earlier, don't forget to follow us on the socials. I'll drop our link tree in the chat, but we are on Facebook, Instagram, TikTok, Blue Sky, and of course, YouTube, where you might be watching us now. And don't forget, you can check out previous episodes of RfRx on the RfRx playlist. And we also have several other playlists you can check out. You can get your daily dose of RfR content and the shorts. So don't forget to check out the short content, as well as Rob's new playlist of RfR deconstruction stories if you want to get in more depth with some of the deconstruction experiences of some of our volunteers. And don't forget to check out all of the great content coming out of RfR Australia. They have a couple of playlists as well that are very, very good.
And speaking of which, the noise just settled down for a moment. I'm going to next do Sherry D'Souza about her experience as a Jehovah's Witness. So that should be fascinating.
Ooh, definitely want to check that one out. So stay tuned for that. And with that, we are right on time to welcome our fabulous executive director, Gail Jordan, to give us some closing thoughts. Gail, welcome to the show. Thank you for joining us.
Can't unmute.
There you are.
Working on it.
We can hear you now.
You can hear me? Okay.
Yes.
Thank you, Dan, for joining us. You mean so much to us here at Recovering from Religion. You've been a supporter from way, way back, and we're so grateful you were on. You know, we bounced around and we covered a lot of subjects, but one of the things that meant the most to me, Dan, was when you were talking about the value of talking through what you believe, that whether you're with a friend or foe, that process of thinking it through and saying those words out loud has meaning, because as you try to articulate what your feelings are, as you try to articulate what your beliefs are, you sometimes get there. And so that's one of the things that happens on our Recovering from Religion helpline. And so if you would like to call and talk to a friendly person, you as in listeners, anybody, whether it's live or later, and you want that process, there's a phone number that you can call and just talk through and say, I'm not real sure where I am, but can I talk through and see if I can get there? There's so much value to that anyway. I know we talked about a lot of things, but that's the thing that kind of hit home for me. I so appreciate, Dan, you coming and sharing with us, and the folks that your circle and your podcast reach. You never know who that's going to touch. You never know who that's going to reach. So I appreciate you coming on to on the Recovering from Religion side. And I hope everybody visit Dan's podcast and website and all the places where you can find Dan. And in the meantime, also check out Recovering from Religion and all programs that we have to offer. And we hope to see everybody next week on the same bat channel, same bat station, same bat time. And we'll see you next week. And please, everybody stay for the hangout.
Yeah, thanks, Gail. And if you would like to join us for the hangout tonight, I dropped the link to the Zoom meeting where we have that into the chat, and we'll be popping over there as soon as we wrap up here. And with that, this has been RfRx, your prescription for coping. Remember, skepticism is self-care, and a good question is always worth asking. So until next time, bye, everybody.
Thanks, everybody. Bye.